In the hushed, velvet-draped dining room of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, a deal worth $10 billion was about to be destroyed by a single, misunderstood word. The air, usually thick with the scent of truffle oil and quiet success, was now crackling with the fury of one of the world's richest men. Henry Sterling, a titan of technology, was watching his empire teeter on the brink of collapse. His Japanese partners were silent, their faces impassive masks of offense. Nobody spoke their language. Nobody could fix it. The billionaire was fuming, his voice a low growl of impending doom, and then from the shadows the waitress replied. The Gilded Compass wasn't just a restaurant. It was a statement. Perched 70 floors above Columbus Circle, its panoramic windows framed Central Park like a living masterpiece. The clientele was a curated collection of old money, new tech, and quiet power. The staff moved with the silent, rehearsed grace of ballet dancers, their purpose to be invisible yet omniscient. Among them, Chloe Reed was an anomaly. To the casual observer, she was just another part of the impeccable service. Slender with quiet grey eyes and brown hair, pulled back in a severe regulation bun, she projected an aura of unassuming efficiency. She was 24, but her weary, watchful expression made her seem older. Most of her colleagues were aspiring actors or artists waiting tables to fund their dreams. Chloe was just waiting. She never spoke of a past, and her plans for the future were a conversational black hole. She simply did her job with a precision that bordered on obsessive. Her movements economical, her mind seemingly a universe away. Her colleagues whispered. They speculated she was in witness protection, or perhaps the disowned heiress of some forgotten dynasty. The truth was far more mundane, and in its own way, more painful. Chloe was hiding in plain sight, using the anonymity of a service uniform as a shield against a life she had sprinted away from 3 years ago. A life of suffocating expectations of gilded cages in a different part of the world. Here, as a waitress, she was nobody. And nobody was exactly who she needed to be. Tonight, the tension in the Gilded Compass was unusually sharp. Table 12. The Prime Minister of Tables, with its unparalleled view of the park, was occupied by Henry Sterling. Sterling wasn't just wealthy. He was a force of nature. The founder and CEO of Aura Tech, he had clawed his way to the top of the tech world with a combination of genius ruthlessness and a volcanic temper. He was a man who didn't request, he demanded. He didn't ask, he commanded. The world bent to his will. Tonight, however, his will was being tested. Across the table from him sat 3 men from Yamato Corporation, the Japanese electronics giant. The leader was Mr. Thorntonard, Tanaka Kenji, an elderly, impeccably dressed man whose quiet demeanor and soft-spoken words held more weight than Sterling's loudest bellow. This wasn't just a dinner. It was the final, delicate step in a negotiation that would define Aura Tech's future. A $10 billion merger that would solidify Sterling's legacy or shatter it. Chloe was assigned to the section, but not the table itself. The manager, a perpetually stressed but decent man named Robert Mayfield, had assigned his most senior waiter, a Frenchman named Luke, to the task. Chloe's job was to be a ghost, ensuring water glasses were filled from a distance, that Luke had everything he needed, and to remain utterly invisible. From her vantage point by the service station, she watched the scene unfold like a slow-motion car crash. She saw Sterling's forced, toothy smile, the way his fingers drummed a frantic, impatient rhythm on the tablecloth. She saw his 2 VPs, a man and a woman in their 30s, looking pale and terrified. and she saw the Japanese delegation. They were a portrait of serene control, their politeness a shield. Sterling's brash American charm couldn't seem to penetrate. They had a translator, a young, eager man from Sterling's own company, but something was already wrong. Chloe could feel it in the air, a subtle dissonance in the rhythm of the conversation. The pauses were too long. The bows were a fraction too stiff. Mr. Tanaka spoke, his voice a low, melodic murmur. The translator listened, nodding vigorously, then turned to Sterling. Mr. Tanaka expresses his admiration for the view, Mr. Sterling. He says it is a testament to your company's high aspirations. Sterling beamed, clapping his hands together. Excellent. Tell him the only thing better than the view is the future our companies will build together. The translator relayed the message. Mr. Tanaka smiled faintly, a brief, polite flicker of the lips that didn't reach his eyes. Chloe, who had spent 18 years of her life immersed in the intricate dance of Japanese culture, recognized that smile. It was not a smile of agreement. It was a smile of polite endurance. She refilled a water glass at an adjacent table. Her ears tuned to the conversation at table 12. She couldn't hear the Japanese, only the English translations, but she could read the room. And the room was telling her that Henry Sterling, a man who could bend markets to his will, was failing. He was trying to conquer when he should have been trying to connect. He was loud when the moment called for quiet. He was treating this delicate, honor-bound negotiation like a hostile takeover, and the ice beneath his feet was growing thinner by the second. Chloe felt a familiar, unwelcome knot tighten in her stomach. It was the feeling of watching a powerful man make a fool of himself, a feeling she had spent the last 3 years trying to forget. She turned her back, focusing on polishing a wine glass until it gleamed, hoping to retreat back into the comfortable anonymity of her role. But she knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that the night was far from over. The first visible crack appeared with the appetizers. Luke, the veteran waiter, presented the amuse-bouche with a flourish. Tonight, from Chef Antoine, we have a sea urchin panna cotta with a dashi foam and Kaluga caviar, he announced, his French accent lending an extra layer of gravitas to the dish. Sterling nodded enthusiastically. The best in the city, only the best for my esteemed guests. Mr. Tanaka looked at the small, elegant dish. He said something to his translator in a quiet, inquisitive tone. The young translator's brow furrowed. He listened, asked for clarification, then turned to Sterling, his confidence visibly faltering. Mr. Sterling, Mr. Tanaka is asking about the provenance of the uni. Sterling waved a dismissive hand. Provenance? It's from the chef, the best chef. Tell him it's from the ocean, where else? He chuckled. The VPs forced a laugh. The translator, looking miserable, attempted to relay this non-answer. Chloe watched Mr. Tanaka's face. His expression didn't change, but his posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. To Sterling, it was a simple question about food. To Mr. Tanaka, it was a question about respect for ingredients, about detail, about sincerity. A top-tier Japanese chef would know the exact prefecture, perhaps even the specific diver who procured the sea urchin. Sterling's glib response was not just unhelpful. It was an insult to the philosophy of the question itself. Chloe could almost hear the unspoken subtext. If you do not care where the smallest ingredient on your table comes from, how can I trust you with the intricate details of a multi-billion-dollar technology merger? The meal continued, a parade of exquisite dishes, each one a potential minefield. Robert, the manager, hovered nearby. His face, a mask of professional calm that barely concealed his rising panic. He caught Chloe's eye and gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head, a silent acknowledgement that things were going poorly. The conversation had stalled. Sterling, sensing the growing chasm, began to overcompensate. He talked louder, gestured more broadly, and started telling a long, rambling story about a yachting trip in the Caribbean. It was meant to be a display of wealth and power, a way to impress them with his lifestyle. But to the reserved Japanese executives, it came across as boorish and self-aggrandizing. They listened with unwavering politeness, their silence a deepening abyss into which Sterling's monologue echoed and died. Then came the main course, a beautifully seared cut of A5 Wagyu beef. "Now this," Sterling boomed, "is something you'll appreciate, the finest Japanese beef right here in New York." Mr. Tanaka examined the perfectly marbled steak. He spoke to his translator again, a longer sentence this time, his tone still level but with a new, sharper edge. The translator swallowed hard. "Mr. Sterling," the young man began, his voice trembling slightly. "Mr. Tanaka asks, he understands this is from the Kagoshima prefecture. He is asking if you can confirm it is not from a farm in the vicinity of the Sakurajima volcano." Sterling stared, utterly baffled. "The what?" "The volcano. What in God's name does a volcano have to do with the steak?" The translator, now sweating under the pressure, tried to explain. "Sir, I believe it's a concern about the soil, the volcanic ash. For him, it is a matter of purity of the flavor profile. It is a very specific preference." "Specific? It's insane." Sterling snapped, his voice rising. He turned to Luke. "Is this volcano-free beef or what?" Luke, the French waiter, looked completely lost. "Monsieur, it is A5 Wagyu, the highest grade. That is all the information I have." Robert Mayfield, the manager, swooped in. His smile stretched painfully thin. "Gentlemen, I can assure you our purveyor sources only the absolute finest cuts. Let me go and check the certification for you immediately." As Robert scurried away, Sterling's frustration finally boiled over. He gestured angrily at his own translator. "This is your fault. I'm paying you a fortune to make this smooth. Why can't you handle a simple question?" "Sir, it's not a simple question," the translator stammered. "It's a matter of extreme cultural nuance. The way he asked. It's a test. A test. I'm Henry Sterling. I don't get tested by my dinner guests." He hissed, his voice low, but vibrating with rage. Across the table, Mr. Tanaka and his two colleagues had placed their chopsticks down. They weren't speaking. They were simply watching, observing the meltdown. Their faces were blank, but their judgment was clear. The deal wasn't just stalling. It was actively dying right there on the pristine white tablecloth. From her station, Chloe felt a cold dread creep up her spine. She knew exactly what was happening. This wasn't about the beef. It was about omotenashi, the Japanese concept of wholehearted, anticipatory hospitality. It was about showing that you had considered every possible need of your guest before they even realized it themselves. Sterling hadn't just failed to anticipate their needs. He was openly mocking them as unreasonable. In the silent, brutal calculus of Japanese business etiquette, he had just committed an unforgivable sin. He had caused his guests to lose face by making their concerns seem trivial. Robert returned, his face ashen. "Mr. Sterling, I have the paperwork. The farm is indeed 70 kilometers from Sakurajima. However, the certificate is in Japanese." It was the final straw. Sterling slammed his fist on the table, not hard enough to knock anything over, but with enough force to make every head in the hushed restaurant turn. The sound was like a gunshot in a library. "Useless!" He snarled, his furious gaze sweeping past Robert, past Luke, past his own terrified team. "I'm surrounded by useless people. This is the best restaurant in New York City. And nobody here has the basic competence to handle one simple thing. Is there anyone in this entire million-dollar establishment who speaks Japanese?" The question hung in the air, a raw, desperate challenge. The silence that followed was absolute and damning. Luke looked at the floor. Robert's mouth opened and closed with no sound. The translator seemed to shrink in his chair. And from the shadows, Chloe Reed took one involuntary step forward. Henry Sterling's outburst had shattered the carefully constructed illusion of the gilded compass. The low hum of conversation at other tables died away, replaced by a tense, voyeuristic silence. Diners peeked over their wine glasses, their expressions a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Sterling's face was a mask of thunderous rage, his complexion ruddy. He felt control, the one thing he valued above all else, slipping through his fingers. The $10 billion deal was evaporating before his eyes, not because of market fluctuations or a competitor's savvy move, but because of a piece of meat and a volcano. The sheer absurdity of it fueled his fury. "Well," he demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous, serrated whisper as he glared at Robert Mayfield. "I'm waiting for an answer, Robert. Or is your job title Manager of Incompetence?" Robert, a man who had placated Arab princes and soothed the egos of Hollywood legends, was visibly trembling. "Mr. Sterling, I deeply apologize. It is a failing on our part. We do not have a Japanese-speaking staff member on duty tonight. It was an oversight." "An oversight?" Sterling's laugh was a dry, ugly sound. "An oversight is forgetting to put a lemon twist in a martini. This is a multi-billion-dollar catastrophe. You're fired, Robert. Pack your things. I'll buy this restaurant tomorrow morning just to have the pleasure of firing you again." The threat was real. Everyone knew Sterling had the money and the spite to do it. Robert's face went white. He had a mortgage, 2 kids in college. His entire life was built on his reputation, and Henry Sterling was about to incinerate it in a fit of pique. Across the table, Mr. Tanaka finally moved. He picked up his napkin, folded it precisely, and placed it on the table. It was a clear, unambiguous signal. The dinner was over. His 2 colleagues followed his lead in perfect synchrony. The deal was dead. "Wait!" Sterling barked, a note of pure panic now cutting through his anger. He turned to his own team. "Do something, fix this." His VPs looked at each other in helpless terror. What could they do? The cultural damage was done. The offense was absolute. The corporate translator, seeing the end of his own career, simply stared at his plate defeated. It was in this moment of complete and utter breakdown that Chloe moved. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was an instinct, a reflex honed by years of living in a world where harmony was paramount and public displays of discord were the ultimate shame. She saw Robert's career about to be destroyed over an honest mistake. She saw a lifetime of work on both sides of the table about to be undone by ego and ignorance. And she saw 3 visitors in a foreign country being subjected to a deeply uncomfortable, humiliating experience. She took another step, then another, emerging from the relative obscurity of the service station into the harsh spotlight of table 12. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to stay invisible to protect the fragile anonymity she had so carefully constructed. The name Chloe Reed was a fiction, a flimsy shield. Revealing her fluency in Japanese, especially the rare formal dialect she commanded, was like lighting a flare in the dead of night. It would attract attention. It could lead him to her. But the sight of Robert Mayfield's ashen, terrified face tipped the scales. He had been kind to her, giving her a job when she'd shown up with no references and a haunted look in her eyes. He'd never pried, never asked questions. He had given her a sanctuary, and Sterling was about to burn it to the ground. Her soft-soled shoes made no sound on the plush carpet. She stopped just behind and to the side of Robert, a respectful distance from the table. She bowed. Not a shallow Western-style nod of the head, but a deep, formal bow from the waist, her back straight, her hands clasped in front of her. A bow of profound apology and respect. The entire table, including Sterling, stared at her. Who was this waitress? What was she doing? For a few seconds she said nothing, holding the bow. It was a gesture of deference, a silent request for permission to speak, a way of resetting the disastrous emotional tone of the room. When she finally straightened, her eyes were not on the fuming billionaire, but on Mr. Tanaka. And then she spoke. Her voice, when it came, was quiet but clear, cutting through the thick, tense atmosphere like a silver bell. The words that came out of her mouth were not the hesitant textbook phrases of a student. They were fluid, elegant, and pitched in the impossibly polite and formal register of Kigo, the honorific speech used for addressing those of the highest status. It was a level of Japanese that few non-native speakers ever mastered, redolent of old-world Kyoto, of diplomacy, of deep ingrained respect. She was apologizing, not just for the confusion about the meal, but for the entire atmosphere, for the breach of harmony, for the discomfort of the guests, for the loud voice and aggressive posture of their host. She was taking the blame as a representative of the establishment onto herself. The effect was instantaneous and profound. The moment Chloe began to speak, the universe of the gilded compass tilted on its axis. Henry Sterling's jaw, which had been set in a hard line of fury, went slack with utter shock. His VPs and translator stared as if she had just sprouted wings. Robert Mayfield looked like he was witnessing a miracle, but Chloe's attention was fixed entirely on the three Japanese men. She addressed only Mr. Tanaka, but her words and her posture encompassed his companions, acknowledging their presence and their shared experience. In English, what she said was an apology, but in Japanese it was a work of art. She didn't say, "I'm sorry for the confusion." She said, speaking in the flawless, intricate cadence of formal Japanese, "Tanaka-sama, on behalf of our entire unworthy establishment, I must beg your forgiveness for the unforgivable lapse in our hospitality. That we have caused a guest of your esteemed stature even a moment's discomfort has brought a shadow of deep shame upon this house. My master's ignorance is a reflection of my own poor training, for which I humbly apologize." The words were a masterclass in cultural deflection and honor. She called Mr. Tanaka by the highest honorific "sama." She referred to the restaurant as unworthy. She subtly reframed Sterling's volcanic rage, not as malice, but as the ignorance of a master, and then incredibly took the blame for his ignorance upon herself as a humble servant. In one short, breathtakingly elegant statement, she had absorbed the entirety of Sterling's offense, reframed it as a failing of the restaurant's service, and offered a path for Mr. Tanaka to accept the apology without further embarrassing his host. She had given everyone in the room an escape route. Mr. Tanaka's eyebrows, which had been knitted in a mask of stern disapproval, rose a fraction of an inch. It was the first genuine, unscripted expression he had shown all evening. He looked at this young waitress, truly looked at her for the first time. He saw not a servant, but a person of unexpected depth. He responded his own Japanese formal, but now tinged with curiosity. "You speak the language of my home with surprising grace," he said. "It is a rare skill to find in this country." Chloe bowed her head slightly. "You are too kind, Tanaka-sama. I was fortunate to have spent some years in your beautiful country. It is a land that values subtlety, a lesson my employer has yet to master, for which again I ask for your gracious understanding." Again, the brilliant subtlety. She complimented his country while simultaneously, and with the utmost politeness, pointing out the core of the problem, Sterling's lack of subtlety, while framing it as a forgivable, almost charming American flaw. Sterling, who understood none of the words, but could read the dramatic shift in the room's atmosphere, was mesmerized. The rage had drained from his face, replaced by a stunned, disbelieving awe. He watched this waitress, an employee he wouldn't have recognized 2 minutes earlier, single-handedly diffuse a situation that his entire high-paid team had made infinitely worse. "Mr. Wall." Tanaka then gestured towards the certificate of origin for the beef that Robert was still clutching like a holy relic. "The matter of the steak," he said in Japanese. "It was perhaps a foolish question." "Not at all, Tanaka-sama," Chloe replied instantly, switching to a tone of profound earnestness. "A discerning palate that can distinguish the influence of a mountain soil on the flavor of beef is a sign of a true epicure. It speaks of a deep connection to the land and its gifts. We were unprepared for such expertise, and that is our failure. Allow me." She took the certificate from Robert's nerveless fingers. Her eyes scanned the complex Japanese characters of the document. After a moment, she looked up. "The document confirms that the ranch is in the Kirishima Range, well outside the primary ashfall zone of Sakurajima. The cattle's diet is supplemented with a special blend of rice straw and barley, ensuring a clean, pure flavor. The rancher's name is Ito, a family that has raised this specific bloodline of cattle for 3 generations. They are known for their humane practices and the sweetness of the beef's fat." She relayed this information not as a dry list of facts, but as if she were telling a story, imbuing the details with a sense of reverence. She hadn't just translated the document. She had conveyed its soul. One of Mr. Tanaka's younger colleagues let out a small, involuntary gasp of admiration. Mr. Tanaka himself allowed a small, genuine smile to grace his lips. This was more than he had asked for. This was omotenashi. He picked up his chopsticks. "In that case," he said, his voice now warm, "it would be a shame to let such a fine meal grow cold." His colleagues immediately followed suit. The crisis was over. The silent, tense standoff had been broken. The dinner and the $10 billion deal that depended on it was back on. Henry Sterling stared at Chloe, his mind reeling. He had built an empire on identifying and acquiring assets of immense value. And he had the sudden, dizzying realization that the most valuable asset in this entire 70-story building was not the real estate, not the art on the walls, and certainly not himself. It was the quiet, unassuming waitress who was now discreetly motioning for Luke to serve the main course as if she hadn't just performed corporate open-heart surgery. What followed was one of the most surreal hours of Henry Sterling's life. Chloe did not simply retreat back to her station. With a nod from a shell-shocked Robert, she assumed a new unspoken role at the table. She became the bridge. She stood a few paces back, a phantom presence stepping forward only when needed. She didn't replace Sterling's corporate translator. That would have been a grave insult to the young man, however out of his depth he was. Instead, she supplemented him. When a complex cultural idea was presented, and the translator would provide a literal word-for-word interpretation, Chloe would wait a beat, and then, if necessary, offer a quiet clarification to Sterling's VPs. What Mr. Tanaka is referring to as the sound of the cicada, she explained in a near whisper after one particularly poetic exchange, is a metaphor for appreciating transient beauty. He's not talking about insects. He's comparing the short-term profit model of many Western companies with the Japanese philosophy of building a business that can endure for 100 years. Suddenly, a conversation that had seemed like opaque, mystical nonsense became a sharp business insight. Sterling's team began to understand. They stopped trying to impress and started to listen. Chloe's true genius, however, was in how she translated Sterling to the Japanese. She became his cultural filter. When Sterling, in his typical blunt fashion, said, "Our Q4 projections are aggressive and will crush the competition," Chloe would perform a subtle act of linguistic alchemy. She would turn to Mr. Tanaka and say in her serene, formal Japanese, "Sterling-sama has immense confidence in the market's positive reception of our shared venture. He envisions a future where our combined strength creates a new standard of excellence, encouraging our competitors to improve their own offerings for the benefit of all." She transformed his combative zero-sum declarations into visions of shared prosperity and mutual respect. She wasn't lying. She was translating his intent, not his words. She was building a bridge between a mindset focused on victory and one focused on harmony. Mr. Tanaka was captivated. He began directing more of his conversation towards Chloe, engaging her in discussions about Japanese art, about the seasonal changes in Central Park, about the philosophy of ceramics. He was no longer just assessing a business partner. He was exploring the character of his host's establishment, and by extension, his host. Through Chloe Sterling, a man who had been a boorish caricature just an hour before was being repainted as a powerful but unpolished leader who had the wisdom to surround himself with people of grace and intelligence. Chloe handled it all with an effortless poise that was both astonishing and, for her, terrifying. With every perfectly chosen phrase, every correctly interpreted nuance, she felt the walls of her anonymity crumbling. This was the world she had run from. This was the language of her gilded childhood in the Tokyo diplomatic quarter, a world of high-stakes conversations where a misplaced word could cause an international incident. She had been trained in this art by tutors by her mother, by the very air she breathed for 18 years. She was good at it because it was a part of who she was, a part she had tried to amputate. The dessert course arrived, and the atmosphere was now not just cordial, but genuinely warm. Mr. Tanaka was smiling, telling a story about his grandson. Sterling, humbled into a rare state of listening, was actually laughing along his VPs, looking on in relieved disbelief. As the meal concluded, Mr. Tanaka stood. He bowed first to Sterling, a standard polite bow. Then he turned to Chloe. He gave her a bow of identical depth and sincerity. "The meal was excellent," he said, allowing Chloe to translate. "But the hospitality was transcendent. It is a rare thing to find a soul that understands the heart of a culture, not just its language. You have done your house a great honor tonight." He then turned back to Sterling. "We will sign the preliminary agreement tomorrow at 9 a.m. in your office. My team and I are very much looking forward to a long and prosperous partnership with Auratech." The words hung in the air, golden and perfect. The deal was done. $10 billion, sealed not by lawyers and spreadsheets, but by the quiet grace of a waitress. As the Japanese delegation was escorted to their cars by the ecstatic VPs, Henry Sterling remained at the table. The restaurant was emptying out the staff, beginning their quiet end-of-night routines. Sterling didn't move. He just watched Chloe, who had silently retreated and was now clearing glasses from an adjacent table. Her movements as precise and unassuming as they had been at the start of the night. It was as if the past hour had been a dream. But Sterling knew it wasn't. He waited until she was alone in the section. Then he rose from his chair and walked towards her. His expression was no longer angry or awed or even relieved. It was the look he got when he had identified a target for acquisition. "Chloe Reed," he said, his voice low and serious. "You and I need to have a conversation." The chaotic energy of the dinner service had bled away, leaving behind the tired, methodical calm of closing time. The gilded compass was exhaling. The low murmur of the last remaining patrons was a ghost of the earlier buzz, and the clinking of cutlery being sorted in the distant kitchen was a gentle rhythmic punctuation to the quiet. Chloe moved through this landscape of pristine debris, her body on autopilot. She collected salt and pepper shakers, wiped down the dark wood of empty tables, and stacked bread plates onto her tray. Each mundane task was a small anchor, keeping her tethered to the simple reality of Chloe Reed the waitress, while her mind reeled in the turbulent aftermath of what she had done. She could feel Henry Sterling's eyes on her. It was a palpable sensation, like the heat of a spotlight. He hadn't left with his jubilant team. He remained at the now cleared table 12, a solitary, powerful figure silhouetted against the glittering tapestry of the city. He wasn't looking at the view. He was watching her. She knew the confrontation was inevitable, and with every passing second, the dread coiled tighter in her stomach. The adrenaline that had sharpened her wits and loosened her tongue had long since dissipated, leaving behind the cold, familiar residue of fear. She had spent 3 years building a fortress of anonymity, brick by boring brick. A quiet life, a forgettable job, a name that wasn't her own. Tonight, to save a kind man's job and prevent a spectacular cultural implosion, she had stepped out from behind the battlements and launched a flare high into the night sky. And now, the most powerful man she had ever encountered was walking deliberately toward that light, his footsteps unnervingly silent on the thick carpet. Chloe finished arranging the plates on her tray, the weight of the porcelain a flimsy shield. She forced herself to breathe, to keep her hands from trembling. "You are Chloe Reed," she told herself, a desperate mantra. "You are no one. He can't see what isn't there." "Leave that," he said. His voice was not loud, but it possessed a resonant authority that cut through the room's ambient noise. It was a voice accustomed to absolute, unquestioning obedience. Chloe froze her back still to him. She closed her eyes for a fraction of a second, then turned, schooling her features into a mask of polite, professional deference. "Sir." Sterling stopped a few feet away, his intense blue eyes scanning her as if she were a complex schematic he was trying to decipher. The raw fury from earlier was gone, replaced by a charged, analytical curiosity that she found far more unnerving. "I've seen a lot of things in my 52 years. He began, his voice a low, intense hum. "I've seen code writers who can think in 5 languages. I've seen physicists who can sketch out the universe on a napkin. But I have never in my entire life seen anything like what you did back there." He gestured vaguely toward the table. "You didn't just translate words. You conducted a symphony of etiquette. You took a train wreck and transformed it into a diplomatic triumph. My board of directors pays a crisis management firm $3 million a year, and their best advice would have been to run. You, on the other hand, you fixed it. He took a step closer. So I'm going to ask you again, and this time I want a real answer. Who are you? The question hung in the air between them. Chloe's heart hammered against her ribs. The truth was a loaded weapon, and she would not hand it to him. My name is Chloe Reed, Mr. Sterling. I'm a waitress. A flicker of impatience crossed his face. Stop it. Don't insult my intelligence, and more importantly, don't insult your own. Your Japanese was more than fluent. It was aristocratic. Your understanding of their culture was academic. A person doesn't acquire that level of skill waiting tables. So what is it? Ex-diplomat's kid. A runaway academic. Corporate espionage. He had a ghost of a smile on his lips at the last one, but his eyes were deadly serious. I was fortunate to have a good education and lived abroad when I was younger. Chloe said, the carefully constructed half-truth feeling flimsy and transparent under his dissecting gaze. That's all. He stared at her for a long moment, the silence stretching. He knew she was lying, and she knew that he knew. It was a silent, mutual acknowledgement that brought a new level of tension to the exchange. He sighed a gust of frustrated air and abruptly changed his approach. Fine, he said, waving a hand as if to dismiss her entire defense. Don't tell me. I don't care about your past. Your future is what interests me. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket, producing a slim platinum fountain pen and a checkbook bound in dark leather. The quiet snick of the pen cap coming off was louder than a gunshot in the hushed room. Whatever you're doing here, it's over, he stated, not as an offer, but as a declaration of fact. This is not your life anymore. He began to write his movements sharp and decisive. I'm writing you a check for $100,000. Think of it as an inconvenience fee for having to find a new apartment and quit your job. It's a signing bonus. He tore the check from the book with a precise tearing sound and held it out. Chloe stared at the slip of paper. The amount was dizzying. It represented a safety she couldn't even fathom, the ability to disappear again, to go anywhere, to build a better, stronger fortress. But she knew with absolute certainty that it was not a key to freedom. It was the first link in a very beautiful, very expensive chain. She made no move to take it. Sterling's eyes narrowed slightly at her stillness. That's your appetizer, he continued undeterred. The main course is your role. You'll be my senior advisor for global strategy. It's a new position I just created. You'll answer directly to me. Your base salary will be $750,000. Corporate apartment in the Auratech Tower, the one with the view that makes this place look like a basement. A car and driver. Unlimited expense account. Your job will be to be the voice in my ear, the brain in my head, for every dealing we have in Asia, starting with the Yamato merger. You will ensure I never make a fool of myself like that again. You will make us unstoppable. He was painting a picture of a life she had once known, a life of immense privilege, power, and visibility. A life that had nearly destroyed her. The thought of stepping back into that world, even a different version of it, sent a wave of panic through her so potent it was almost nauseating. She could almost feel the cold, possessive hand of her stepfather on her shoulder. She finally met his gaze, her own grey eyes clear and unwavering. Mr. Sterling, that is the most generous offer I could ever imagine. I am truly grateful. Her voice was soft, but the core of it was steel. But I have to decline. If she had slapped him, the effect would have been less dramatic. Henry Sterling was a man who moved markets, toppled competitors, and bent reality to his will. The word no was not a part of his operational vocabulary, especially not from someone he considered himself to be rescuing from obscurity. For a moment, he was utterly silent, his mind rebooting to process the alien concept. Decline. He finally repeated the word, tasting strange in his mouth. What do you mean you decline? Is this a negotiation? You want $1 million? Done. $1,000,005. Name the number. I will not be outbid for talent like yours. It's not about the money, sir. She said the words, feeling achingly inadequate to explain the chasm between his offer and her reality. Then what in God's name is it about? He demanded, his voice rising with incredulous frustration. I am offering you the world on a silver platter, a chance to use a gift that 1 in 100 million people possesses. You want to stay here, spilling wine on tourists and clearing away half-eaten food for the rest of your life. That's your grand ambition. Every word was a jab designed to make her feel small, to make her choice seem insane. And a part of her, the logical part, screamed that he was right. But the deeper part, the part that remembered suffocating fear and the desperate flight in the middle of the night, knew he was fatally wrong. I have my reasons, she said, her voice quiet but firm. I prefer a simple life. The world you're describing, the pressure, the constant visibility, it's not for me. I am happy here. The lie was blatant, but she delivered it with such finality that Sterling, for the first time, paused his assault. He looked at her, truly looked past the uniform and the polite refusal. He saw the tension in her jaw, the rigid control in her posture, the subtle way she angled herself toward the exit. And finally, he saw the deep, undeniable flicker of fear in her eyes. This wasn't a negotiation. This was a flight response. His expression shifted from frustration to a profound, calculating intrigue. The puzzle of Chloe Reed had just become infinitely more complex, and therefore infinitely more He lowered the check. I don't believe you, he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Not for a second. You're not happy here. You're hiding. But I won't press you on it. For now. With a decisive click, he retracted the nib of his fountain pen. He turned the check over, and on the blank back he wrote his personal cell phone number. This is my private line. Not my assistant's, not my office's. Mine. He didn't offer the check to her this time. Instead, he stepped forward and carefully slid it onto her tray, placing it directly beside a half-empty water glass. The offer stands, every part of it. When you realize that a simple life is no life at all for someone like you call that number, day or night. He looked at her one last time, a long, searching gaze that felt like it was mapping her very soul. Don't be a fool, Chloe Reed. A person only gets one chance to change their entire destiny. This is yours. Without another word, he turned and strode out of the silent dining room, a king leaving a court that no longer made sense to him. Chloe stood motionless, the immense empty space seeming to press in on her. Her gaze fell to the tray. There it was. A slip of paper bearing a 7-figure salary offer, a $100,000 bonus, and a 10-digit phone number. It was a lifeline. It was a time bomb. And it had her fake name written right on it. The name Henry Sterling would now use to start digging. The flare she had launched was no longer just a light. It was now a beacon, and she knew with a chilling certainty that he would follow it all the way down into the darkness of her past. Henry Sterling did not become a billionaire by accepting things he didn't understand. Chloe Reed's refusal was a puzzle, and Sterling's mind was engineered to solve puzzles, whether they were in lines of code or in the perplexing motivations of human beings. For 2 days he left the check and the offer hanging in the air, expecting a call. None came. On the 3rd day, his patience, a notoriously finite resource, ran out. He didn't delegate the task. This was personal. He sat in his minimalist penthouse office, the city lights spread beneath him like a carpet of scattered diamonds, and he initiated a search for Chloe Reed. He engaged the best corporate security and private investigation firm money could buy, a discreet outfit on Park Avenue, run by a former MI6 officer. The initial results were frustratingly thin. Chloe Reed, aged 24, had a social security number issued just 3 years ago. Her employment history began and ended with the Gilded Compass. She had a small, bare-bones apartment in Queens. No credit history beyond a single, low-limit credit card paid on time. No social media presence. No family listed. No past. She was, for all intents and purposes, a ghost who had materialized in New York City 36 months ago. This is a clean identity. The investigator, a crisp Englishman named David Chenoweth, reported over a secure line. Professionally done, but not government level. It's meant to withstand a cursory background check, not a deep dive by someone like you, Mr. Sterling. So dive deeper, Sterling commanded. Fingerprints from her employment application. Facial recognition against every database you can access. I want to know who she was before she became a waitress.
That is 7 centimeters.
The resources of a multi-billionaire are vast. They bypassed legal channels using back doors into international databases. For a week, they found nothing. It was as if she had been born on the day she applied for her Social Security card. Then they got a hit. A partial facial recognition match flagged from a guest list database at a diplomatic function in Tokyo 5 years prior. The photo was of a younger woman, her hair styled differently, wearing a formal silk gown. The name on the list was not Chloe Reed. It was Catherine Ashford. With a name, the floodgates opened. Catherine Ashford was the stepdaughter of U.S. Senator Robert Davenport, a powerful, charismatic politician with a frighteningly clean public image and rumored ties to ruthless corporate lobbyists. Davenport had served as a trade liaison in Japan for several years. His wife, Catherine's mother, had passed away when Catherine was a teenager. Catherine, a brilliant student of language and culture, had essentially become her stepfather's hostess and unofficial translator at countless functions. Then 3 years ago, she had vanished. The official story fed to the society pages was that she had chosen to pursue her art studies at a private secluded institution in Europe to grieve her mother's passing away from the public eye. But Chenoweth's team found something else. They found a pattern of control. They found sealed university records, a restraining order filed by Catherine against a family associate that was mysteriously withdrawn a week later. They found whispers from former household staff about Senator Davenport's possessive, almost obsessive behavior towards his stepdaughter after his wife's death, his insistence on controlling every aspect of her life. Sterling sat at his desk, reading the encrypted report, and for the first time he understood. Chloe. Catherine wasn't just hiding. She was running. Her refusal of his offer wasn't an act of pride. It was an act of self-preservation. A high-profile job as his personal liaison would have put her directly in the spotlight, a spotlight her powerful and controlling stepfather would undoubtedly see. He felt a cold knot of something unfamiliar in his gut. It was a mix of anger at the senator and a grudging respect for the woman who had traded a life of privilege for anonymous freedom. He had seen her as an asset to be acquired. Now he saw her as a person in a cage. That evening he didn't call. He went to her apartment building in Queens. He didn't take his security detail. He waited across the street in an unremarkable town car as she got off the subway looking small and tired in a simple coat a world away from the commanding presence she'd had in the restaurant. He watched her check over her shoulder before entering her building, a habitual gesture of someone who never feels truly safe. He gave her 10 minutes, then he went to her door and knocked. She opened it on a chain, her eyes wide with alarm when she saw him. "Mr. Sterling, how did you find me?" "I'm a man who solves puzzles," he said quietly, his tone devoid of its usual arrogance. "May I come in?" "Catherine?" The use of her real name made her flinch as if he'd struck her. She stared at him, her mind racing a cornered animal, deciding whether to fight or flee. She saw something new in his eyes, not acquisitiveness, but a kind of grim understanding. Slowly she closed the door and slid the chain off. Her apartment was tiny, neat, and impersonal. There were no photographs, no mementos. It was the home of someone who didn't plan to stay. "My stepfather," she began, her voice trembling. "Is a problem," Sterling finished for her. "I know. I'm not here to expose you. I'm here to change the deal." He remained standing, giving her space. "The offer of $750,000 a year, the apartment, the car, it's all off the table. It was the wrong offer. It was loud. It was public. It was everything you don't want." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Here is the new deal. I am creating a new unlisted subsidiary of Aura Tech, a cultural consultancy division with a staff of 1. You. You will work from anywhere you choose. Your name will not be on any masthead. You will not attend public meetings. Your official title will be Research Analyst for a non-existent department." He looked her straight in the eye. "Your job will be to be my eyes and ears on all matters of international protocol, starting with Japan. You will prep my team. You will review my correspondence. You will be my secret weapon, the ghost in my machine. Your salary will be $1 million a year, paid through a discreet trust that will be impossible to trace back to me or to you. And my security firm, the one that found you, will now be dedicated to making sure no one else ever does. They will create a digital fortress around your new identity, and they will keep a very close, very quiet watch on Senator Davenport." Catherine stared at him, speechless. He wasn't offering her a job. He was offering her a shield. He was offering her protection, anonymity, and the resources to stay free, all while using the skills she had tried to bury. He had seen her cage, and instead of trying to buy her, he was offering her a way to reinforce it against the outside world, while giving her the freedom to move within it. "Why?" she finally whispered. "Why would you do all this?" Henry Sterling, the ruthless titan of tech, looked around the small, bare apartment and gave an answer of startling honesty. "Because for the first time in 20 years, I was reminded that the most valuable things in this world, talent, integrity, courage, are not things that can be bought. They have to be earned. And because my $10 billion deal is on the line, and I'll be damned if I'm going to let it get screwed up by my own arrogance again. I need you. But I'm offering you a partnership, not a leash." For the first time in 3 years, Catherine Ashford felt a flicker of something she thought she had lost forever: hope. She saw a path forward that wasn't about hiding, but about building. She looked at the man before her, a flawed, arrogant, impatient billionaire who had against all odds shown a capacity for understanding and respect. "My friends here," she said, her voice gaining strength. "They call me Chloe." Sterling allowed a small, rare smile. "All right, Chloe. Do we have a deal?" She took a deep breath, and for the first time, it didn't feel like she was just surviving. It felt like she was beginning. "Yes, Mr. Sterling," she said. "We have a deal." And so the waitress, who spoke perfect Japanese, didn't just get a job. She reclaimed her life. Her story isn't just about a lucky break. It's a powerful reminder that our greatest strengths are often forged in the very pasts we try to escape. It proves that true value isn't always loud and on display. Sometimes it's the quiet voice in the room that speaks with the most authority. Henry Sterling learned that respect is a greater currency than money, and Chloe learned that you can't hide from your talents forever. Sometimes the only way to be truly safe is to embrace the full force of who you are. What do you think? Was Sterling's transformation believable? What would you have done in Chloe's position? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of hidden strength and unexpected alliances resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to subscribe for more real-life stories that will make you think. The air in the private dining room of Chicago's exclusive The Gilded Compass was colder than the autumn wind whipping off Lake Michigan. On one side of the mahogany table sat Robert Sterling, CEO of Sterling Dynamics, a man whose ambition was a force of nature. On the other, Herr Klaus Richter and his delegation from Richter Präzisionstechnik, their faces carved from granite. A multi-billion-dollar merger hung in the balance, a deal that would define Sterling's career. But for 3 excruciating hours, the deal was dying. It wasn't dying in a blaze of arguments. It was suffocating in the profound, impenetrable slants of misunderstanding. The translator had been dismissed an hour ago, and now desperation was the only thing on the menu, and nobody, absolutely nobody, knew what to do next. The Gilded Compass was a restaurant designed to muffle the outside world. Its plush carpets absorbed sound. Its heavy velvet curtains swallowed the city's glare, and its staff moved with the silent, practiced grace of ghosts. Tonight, however, the silence in the oak room was not one of comfort, but of conflict. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket, woven from frustration and the stark, unbridgeable chasm of language. Sarah Jenkins felt it from the moment she pushed through the service door, a heavy silver tray balanced expertly on one hand. She wasn't supposed to be serving this room. This was for senior staff only. But Chloe had called in sick, and the Sterling party was a high-priority, high-stress booking that required all hands on deck. Sarah, with her quiet efficiency and knack for being invisible, was deemed the safest replacement. From across the room she saw him, Robert Sterling. She'd seen his face on the cover of Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. In pictures he looked visionary, a titan of industry. In person, sitting stiffly in his tailored suit, he looked like a man being held hostage. His jaw was a knot of tension, his knuckles white where he gripped a sterling silver fork not to eat, but as an anchor in a storm of his own making. Flanking him were his top executives, Amelia Hayes, the COO, her face a mask of polite concern, and a younger, ambitious-looking man named David Chen, who kept fiddling with his phone under the table, a nervous energy radiating from him. Opposite them sat the Germans. Herr Klaus Richter, the patriarch of the engineering giant, was a man in his late 60s with piercing blue eyes and a posture that suggested a lifetime of discipline. His silence was the most profound in the room. It wasn't empty. It was filled with judgment. His two associates, a man and a woman in their 40s, mirrored his stoicism, their untouched plates of seared scallops, a testament to the failed diplomacy. Sarah knew the story. She'd heard the whispers among the staff. This was the third and final dinner. The deal to merge Sterling Dynamics with Richter's legendary German firm was on life support. The official translator, a highly paid consultant named Mr. Peterson, had, in the words of the maitre d', suffered a catastrophic failure of vocabulary and nerve. An hour ago, Sterling had dismissed him with a quiet but venomous command, leaving the two most powerful men in the room to communicate through strained smiles and the universally understood language of disappointment. Sarah's job was simple: clear the appetizer plates, refill water glasses, and disappear. As she moved around the table, she couldn't help but overhear the broken, desperate attempts at communication. "The, synergy," Sterling said, speaking slowly and loudly, as if the Germans were hard of hearing, not simply non-English speaking. He held up two fingers and then brought them together. "You and me. Together, good." Herr Richter watched the pathetic pantomime with a glacial expression before murmuring something to his colleague in low, guttural German. The colleague responded, his tone sharp and dismissive. Sarah froze for a microsecond, her hand hovering over a water glass. She understood every word. "He thinks we are children," Richter had said. "He brings his fingers together like a toddler playing with toys." The colleague had replied, "It is an insult to our intelligence. He believes a deal of this magnitude can be sealed with hand gestures." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She felt a flush of heat rise up her neck. It had been years since she'd been immersed in the language, but it was a part of her soul she could never erase. Her entire academic life, her planned future had been built around the intricate beauty of the German language and its philosophy, a future that had been snatched away, leaving her here, clearing plates for men who were butchering the very thing she had loved. She continued her circuit of the table, her movements automatic. Her mind, however, was racing. She remembered her dissertation left unfinished on a hard drive in her tiny apartment. Heidegger's Progeny, the linguistic nuances of trust in modern German industrialism. It sounded so grand, so ridiculously academic now. She'd spent 5 years at the University of Chicago, a full scholarship PhD candidate, the star of the Germanic Studies department. Then, in the space of 3 months, a car accident had stolen her parents, leaving her as the sole guardian for her 17-year-old sister Molly and a mountain of unforeseen debt. The doctorate, the professorship, the life of the mind. It all vanished, replaced by the immediate crushing need to pay rent and buy groceries. So she'd taken the first job she could get that had flexible hours and paid in cash tips waitressing. David Chen, the junior executive, suddenly leaned forward, holding his phone. "I have a translation app, Mr. Sterling." He offered, his voice a little too loud. "I have some university German. I can try to bridge the gap." Sterling looked at him with the desperation of a drowning man looking at a piece of driftwood. "Do it, David. Anything is better than this." David cleared his throat and spoke to Richter, his accent thick and clumsy, his grammar a mess. He was trying to convey a point about third-quarter profit projections, but what came out was a jumbled, almost nonsensical string of words. Sarah winced internally. He wasn't just wrong. He was being inadvertently offensive. He was using the informal, You, a form reserved for friends, children, and animals when addressing the deeply traditional Herr Richter. It was the linguistic equivalent of slapping the old man on the back and calling him buddy. Richter's eyes narrowed. He said nothing, but a muscle in his cheek twitched. He picked up his linen napkin, folded it precisely, and placed it on the table. It was a gesture of finality, a signal that the evening and the deal was over. Amelia Hayes, the COO, saw it too. A flicker of panic crossed her face. "Robert," she murmured, a warning in her tone. Sterling's composure finally cracked. He slammed his palm flat on the table, not loudly, but with a sharp, percussive impact that made everyone flinch. The silverware rattled. "This is a catastrophe," he hissed, his voice low and trembling with rage. "Billions of dollars, years of work gone. All because nobody in this room can speak a simple sentence of German." The silence that followed was absolute. The weight of it was immense, pressing down on every person in the room. Sarah stood by the service station tray in hand, trapped in the crossfire of a corporate war. She saw the deal slipping away. She saw the frustration on the American faces and the cold, resolute dismissal on the German faces. But more than that, she heard the silent screams of miscommunication, of cultural ignorance. And in that moment, a reckless, terrifying thought sparked in her mind. A thought that could get her fired, humiliated, and thrown out onto the street. Or just maybe, it could change everything. The air in the oak room grew thick with the metallic taste of failure. Robert Sterling's outburst had shattered the fragile veneer of corporate civility, leaving behind the raw, ugly truth of their impasse. He was breathing heavily, his face flushed, his eyes darting between the impassive Germans and his own crestfallen team. He looked like a general whose army had been defeated without a single shot being fired. Herr Richter pushed his chair back slightly, the legs scraping a faint, mournful sound against the polished floor. It was the unmistakable sound of departure. His associates began gathering their briefcases, their movements crisp and efficient. The end was here. "Wait." Amelia Hayes pleaded, her voice calm but strained. She leaned across the table, trying to catch Richter's eye. "Herr Richter, please. There is simply a barrier, a misunderstanding. The fundamentals of this deal are strong." Richter looked at her, and for the first time a flicker of emotion crossed his face. Pity. He responded in German, his voice even, and measured directed at his colleagues, but meant for the entire room to feel, if not understand. Sarah, standing by the wall, felt the words like a physical blow. "The fundamentals are irrelevant if the foundation is built on disrespect," Richter stated. "They do not have the courtesy to understand us. So how can they claim to value our partnership?" David Chen, emboldened by a foolish sense of duty, once again raised his phone. "Sir, I can translate that. He's saying he is concerned about the respect of the foundation." It was a clumsy, literal, and utterly useless translation that missed the entire soul of the sentiment. Sterling's face contorted in frustration. What does that even mean? The foundation. Are we talking about the building, the financial foundation? What? I think he means the basis of the deal, David stammered, sweating now. The respect for the, groundwork. It was getting worse. Chen's fumbling attempts were like throwing gasoline on a dying fire. He was reducing Richter's profound statement about mutual respect and cultural understanding into corporate jargon. Sarah watched this train wreck in slow motion. Her mind was a whirlwind. This wasn't just about language. This was about culture. The Americans saw this as a transaction, a simple matter of numbers and assets. For Richter, a man who had inherited a company his grandfather had founded, it was about legacy honor and Vertrauen trust, a deep, almost sacred concept of trust that could never be conveyed by a smartphone app or a terrified junior executive with 2 semesters of college German. She felt a strange sense of ownership over the situation, an academic's indignation at seeing her field of study so carelessly brutalized. These were not just words. They were vessels of meaning, history, and worldview. Chen was smashing the vessels and showing Sterling the broken shards, pretending it was the whole picture. Her own life had been about the weight of words. The carefully chosen words of comfort she gave her sister Molly after their parents' funeral. The stark, unforgiving words on the eviction notice. The humiliating words of the academic dean, explaining why her scholarship and stipend were being terminated without a leave of absence. The program is highly competitive, Sarah. We can't simply hold a spot for you indefinitely. Words had destroyed her world. Maybe, just maybe, they could also rebuild it. Richter was now standing. His associates followed suit. He gave a short, formal bow, a gesture of finality that needed no translation. "Mr. Sterling," he said the 2 English words, sounding alien and final in his mouth. Sterling stood up, his face ashen. He had lost. Years of planning, of aggressive acquisitions and ruthless strategy, all culminating in this humiliating defeat in a hushed dining room. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. What could he say? Shout louder. Make bigger hand gestures. This was the abyss, the absolute edge of failure. Sarah's feet felt rooted to the floor. Her training screamed at her to remain invisible, to let the titans clash and fall without getting in their way. Being a waitress was about anticipating needs. Yes, but it was also about self-preservation. Getting involved was professional suicide. They wouldn't thank her. They would resent her for witnessing their failure, for overstepping her station. She would be fired on the spot. And Molly was counting on her paycheck to help pay for her community college application fees. But then, as Richter began to turn, one of his associates muttered a final biting comment to his colleague. It was a low, conspiratorial whisper, not meant for anyone else to hear. It is as I predicted. American arrogance. They believe the world must learn their language, their customs. They have no depth. That was it. That was the final push. It wasn't about the deal anymore. It was about pride. Not Robert Sterling's pride, but a deeper, more fundamental pride in understanding, in bridging the gap that everyone else saw as a chasm. It was the pride of the scholar she used to be. Before her conscious mind could stop her, before the fear could paralyze her limbs, Sarah took a single step forward from the shadows of the service station. Her voice, when it came out, was quiet, yet it cut through the funereal silence of the room with the sharpness of glass. She didn't speak to Sterling. She didn't speak to his team. She looked directly at Herr Klaus Richter, who had his back half turned towards her. And in flawless, formal academic German, she said, "Verzeihen Sie die Störung. Herr Richter, aber was Ihr Kollege gerade gesagt hat, ist nicht ganz fair." The room went utterly still. The world seemed to stop. For a full 5 seconds, the only sound was the faint hum of the restaurant's ventilation system. Sarah's words, clear and perfectly enunciated, hung in the air like a ringing bell. "Excuse the interruption, Herr Richter, but what your colleague just said is not entirely fair." Klaus Richter froze mid-turn. His entire body went rigid. Slowly, deliberately, he turned his head then his entire body to face the source of the voice. His eyes, which had been dismissive and cold, were now wide with utter astonishment. He stared at Sarah, this young woman, in a simple black waitress uniform, as if she had just sprouted wings. His two associates looked equally stunned, their mouths slightly agape. The American side of the table was a picture of pure confusion. They didn't understand the words, but they understood the tone. They understood the sudden dramatic shift in the room's atmosphere. They saw the German's shock, and it was a more powerful communication than anything that had been said all night. Robert Sterling's face went through a rapid series of emotions. Bewilderment, then irritation, and finally a surge of pure, unadulterated fury. Who was this girl? A waitress? How dare she speak? How dare she interrupt this corporate funeral? He thought for a delirious moment that she was perhaps offering them more bread. "What is going on?" he demanded, his voice a harsh rasp. "Who said that you—" He pointed a trembling finger at Sarah. "What did you say?" Sarah's heart was a wild bird beating against the cage of her ribs. The adrenaline was a roaring fire in her ears. The sheer audacity of what she had just done washed over her, and for a terrifying second, she felt her knees weaken. She had spoken. She had crossed a line that wasn't just professional, but societal. She, the invisible servant, had given voice in a room of kings. But she didn't look at Sterling. Her focus remained entirely on Herr Richter. She held his gaze, her expression respectful, but firm. The scholar in her had taken over the part of her that knew this was a debate, a thesis defense, not a scolding. Richter took a step towards her, his eyes scanning her face, searching for some explanation for this impossible reality. He replied in German, his voice no longer flat, but filled with cautious curiosity. You speak German?" It was less a question, and more a statement of disbelief. "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, maintaining the formal address. "I studied it. Your language, your philosophy, your literature. They were to be my life's work." The choice of words was deliberate. My life's work. It conveyed a depth of knowledge and passion that went far beyond a simple language course. It was a signal to him that she wasn't just a translator. She was an initiate into his culture. On the American side, the confusion was boiling over into anger. "David, what are they saying?" Sterling snapped, turning on his junior executive. David Chen looked pale and utterly lost. I don't know, sir. She's speaking very quickly. It's a complex dialect, I think." It wasn't a dialect. It was just pure, articulate High German, and David's inability to even grasp it exposed his earlier claims as the charade they were. Amelia Hayes, however, was watching the interaction with a shrewd, calculating look in her eyes. She wasn't looking at Sarah as a waitress. She was looking at her as an unexpected asset. A wild card. "Shut up, David!" Sterling seethed, his eyes locked on Sarah. "You, waitress, what is your name?" "Sarah Jenkins." "Sir," she said, her voice steady, though her hands hidden behind her back were trembling. "Miss Jenkins." Sterling said, his voice dripping with sarcasm and menace. "You are fired. Get your things and get out of my sight. You have no idea the damage you have just caused." He turned back to the Germans, intending to offer a final desperate apology for the interruption from his staff. But Herr Richter wasn't looking at him. He was still looking at Sarah. He held up a hand, a clear gesture for Sterling to stop. He addressed Sarah again in German. "You said what my colleague said was unfair. Explain yourself. What did you find unfair?" This was it. The moment of truth. She could either apologize, scurry away, and accept her fate, or she could double down on the most insane gamble of her life. She took a deep breath. "Your colleague," she began, her German flowing with an academic precision she hadn't used in years, spoke of American arrogance. He suggested that your hosts believe the world must conform to their ways, that they lack depth. While I understand his frustration, which stems from a profound communication breakdown, to label it arrogance is to mistake the symptom for the disease. She paused, letting the words sink in. Richter's expression was now one of intense concentration. He was no longer looking at a waitress. He was listening to an argument. "The issue here is not arrogance," Sarah continued, gaining confidence with every sentence. "It is a difference in cultural perspective regarding the very nature of a business agreement. Mr. Sterling and his team see this deal through a lens of metrics efficiency and shareholder value. It is a transactional worldview. You, Herr Richter, and your company, which has been in your family for over a century, see it through a lens of legacy craftsmanship and a trust that is meant to span generations. He is speaking prose. You are speaking poetry, and you have no interpreter." As she finished, the room was so quiet, she could hear the frantic beat of her own heart. She had laid it all bare. She had diagnosed the core problem that millions of dollars in consulting fees had failed to identify. She had done it in a language nobody on the American side understood, defending the very man who was about to fire her to the man he had been trying to win over. Robert Sterling stood there, utterly powerless, his face a mask of rage and confusion. He knew something profound was happening, but he was locked on the outside, a deaf man at an opera. Herr Richter stared at Sarah for a long, unblinking moment. Then he turned to Robert Sterling, and for the first time that night, he spoke to him in slow, heavily accented, but perfectly clear English. "Mr. Sterling," he said, his voice a low rumble, "I believe we will not be leaving just yet. And this young woman, Miss Jenkins, she is not fired." He gestured towards the empty translator's chair at the table. "She will sit." The command was absolute. "She will sit." For a moment, nobody moved. Robert Sterling looked as if Richter had just slapped him across the face. He, the CEO of Sterling Dynamics, in his own private booking, had just been countermanded by a foreign national regarding his own employee. The power dynamic in the room had not just shifted, it had been completely inverted. Amelia Hayes was the first to react. She gave Sarah a subtle but firm nod, her eyes conveying a clear message. "Do as he says. This is our only chance." Still in a state of shock, Sarah walked from the relative safety of the wall to the gleaming mahogany table. The few steps felt like a mile. She was acutely aware of the cheap rubber-soled shoes. She wore a stark contrast to the polished Italian leather of everyone else at the table. She pulled out the heavy, ornate chair, the same one the disgraced Mr. Peterson had occupied hours earlier, and sat down. The starched black fabric of her uniform felt coarse and out of place against the chair's plush velvet. She folded her hands on the table, her waitress instincts fighting with the terrifying new reality of her position. "Now," Richter said, reverting to German and addressing Sarah directly. "Mr. Sterling was trying to speak of synergy. It is a word we know, but his meaning was lost. Tell me, what is his vision for this synergy? Not in his clumsy words, but in a way that an engineer, a craftsman, would understand." All eyes turned to Sarah. Sterling's gaze was a mixture of suspicion and grudging desperation. He was cornered. His entire empire, his legacy, was now inexplicably in the hands of a waitress whose name he hadn't known 10 minutes ago. Sarah turned to him. Her voice was quiet but steady. Mr. Sterling, Herr Richter, asks you to explain your vision for the synergy between the two companies. He asks that you explain it not as a businessman, but as an engineer. Sterling blinked, momentarily thrown. He was used to speaking in terms of market caps, quarterly growth, and shareholder dividends. As an engineer, yes, sir, Sarah said. He is a man who builds things that last. He wants to understand what you intend to build with him. The reframing of the question was a revelation. It cut through the corporate jargon and hit at the heart of the matter. Sterling was silent for a moment, the gears in his formidable brain turning. He looked at Richter, truly looked at him for the first time, not as an obstacle, but as a peer. Okay, he said, his tone changing. The anger was gone, replaced by a focused intensity. Okay, tell him this. He began to speak, and Sarah began to translate. But she wasn't just translating. She was transforming. When Sterling said, "We will leverage your precision manufacturing capabilities to enhance our rapid prototyping division," Sarah didn't just repeat the words in German. She paused, processed, and then conveyed the essence. "Herr Richter," she would say, "Mr. Sterling sees your workshops not merely as a factory, but as a master's studio. He believes that the discipline and exactitude of your methods can provide the foundational strength that his company's speed and agility currently lack. He imagines it as a perfectly balanced engine, your precision as the finely milled crankshaft, his innovation as the high-octane fuel. One cannot function without the other." As she spoke, a visible change came over Klaus Richter. His posture softened. He leaned forward, listening intently. He started to nod, not just in politeness, but in genuine understanding. He began to ask questions, complex technical questions about material tolerances and production scaling. Sterling, in turn, answered with a fluency and passion for his own work that had been buried under layers of executive bravado. He spoke of his company's breakthroughs in composite materials and software-driven design. And with every exchange, Sarah was the bridge. She didn't just swap nouns and verbs. She found the right cultural and technical idioms. She transformed Sterling's talk of disruptive innovation into the German concept of Vorsprung, durch Technik, advancement through technology. She converted his aggressive market penetration strategies into a more palatable discussion of building a long-term, sustainable market presence. She was in her element. The years of studying dusty books, of dissecting the works of Goethe and Schiller, of writing papers on the philosophical underpinnings of German industrial identity, it was all flooding back. This wasn't just a translation. It was a live performance of her abandoned dissertation. She was connecting the dots, explaining the nuances, and revealing the shared values that had been lying dormant beneath the surface of their conflict. Amelia Hayes watched, mesmerized. She saw Sarah's innate talent. It wasn't just about language. It was about emotional and cultural intelligence of the highest order. She made a mental note to pull every file the restaurant had on Sarah Jenkins. David Chen, however, was shrinking in his chair. With every fluent, elegant sentence Sarah uttered, his own incompetence was thrown into sharper relief. He had tried to make himself a hero, the man who saved the deal. Now he was less than a spectator. He was a monument to the very problem Sarah was solving. A bitter, resentful jealousy began to coil in his gut. After an hour of intense, productive conversation, a waiter, one of Sarah's former colleagues, approached the table to clear the main course plates, which had grown cold long ago. He looked at Sarah sitting at the table with the executives, his face a mask of utter bewilderment. Sarah gave him a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head, and he retreated in confusion. Finally, Richter raised a hand. He looked from Sterling to Sarah, and a small, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. He spoke in German. "Miss Jenkins, there is a clause in the final pages of the contract. Our legal team calls it paragraph 17. I call it the legacy clause. My American counterparts have dismissed it as sentimental. They wish to strike it from the document. This has been the primary sticking point for a week. I want you to explain it to Mr. Sterling. Explain why it is not sentimental but essential." Sarah's blood ran cold. The legacy clause. She had no idea what it was. She was a waitress, not a lawyer. This was beyond her. The fragile confidence she had built over the last hour threatened to shatter. "Sir," she said to Sterling, her voice wavering for the first time. "He is referring to a specific clause in the contract. Paragraph 17. The legacy clause. He says your team wants it removed, and it is the main reason the deal has stalled." Sterling's face darkened. "The legacy clause. It's a page of meaningless poetic nonsense. It talks about honoring the spirit of the founders and community stewardship. It has no legal teeth. It's unenforceable fluff. Our lawyers quite rightly want it gone. It creates potential liabilities based on sentiment." Sarah looked back at Richter, then at Sterling. She was caught in the middle of the single most important disagreement of the entire merger. And she was completely out of her depth. The pressure in the room suddenly refocused, narrowing to a single point right where Sarah sat. The brief camaraderie forged through technical discussion evaporated, replaced by the cold, hard reality of a legal impasse. "Tell Herr Richter," Sterling said, his voice clipped and impatient, "that our legal team is second to none. If they say the clause is a liability, it's a liability. We can issue a press release about honoring his company's history. We can put up a plaque, but we will not put vague emotional language into a multi-billion-dollar contract." Sarah took a deep breath, her mind racing. She had to choose her words carefully. A direct translation of Sterling's dismissive tone would send them right back to square one. She turned to Richter. "Herr Richter," she began in German, "Mr. Sterling acknowledges the significance of your company's history. However, his legal advisors are concerned that the current wording of the legacy clause, being rooted in principle rather than precise legal definitions, could create unforeseen complications in the future. They prefer to honor the spirit of the clause through public commitments rather than contractual obligation." She had softened the edges, but the core message was the same. The clause was a problem. Richter listened, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper, which he slid across the table to Sarah. It was a copy of paragraph 17, written in German. "Read it," he commanded, "not with the eyes of a lawyer, but with the eyes of a scholar. Then you will understand." Sarah picked up the paper. Her hands trembled slightly. The text was not dense legal jargon. It was, as Sterling had said, almost poetic. It spoke of the company's duty not just to its shareholders, but to its employees and the town where it was founded. It stipulated that for a period of 25 years, the company would not lay off more than 5% of its local workforce in any given year without first investing in retraining programs. It mandated that a percentage of profits be reinvested into community apprenticeships, carrying on the tradition of the German Mittelstand model, where businesses see themselves as integral parts of the social fabric. It wasn't fluff. It was a covenant. It was the soul of his company codified on paper. It was everything her academic research had taught her about the German industrial psyche. They didn't just build machines. They built communities. They didn't think in fiscal quarters. They thought in generations. Sterling's team saw a liability. Richter saw a promise to his grandfather. Suddenly, Sarah noticed something else. At the bottom of the page was a small annotation, a handwritten note in English, initialed DC. It read, "Client insists on this Heimat clause. Recommend removal. Sentimental, no quantifiable value. DC. David Chen." Her eyes flickered towards him. He was watching her, a bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple. He had been the one interfacing with the German legal team. He had been the one to frame this clause for Sterling's lawyers. And he had used the German word Heimat, a deeply resonant term meaning her homeland, or a place of deep belonging, and reduced it to sentimental. He hadn't just failed to translate the words, he had actively stripped them of their profound cultural and emotional significance. Whether through ignorance or a deliberate attempt to simplify the issue for his superiors, the result was the same catastrophic misrepresentation. He had positioned the heart of the deal as a cancerous tumor to be excised. This was the real problem. It wasn't just a misunderstanding in the dining room. The entire foundation of the negotiation had been built on a flawed, shallow interpretation of the other side's values. "I understand," Sarah said softly, looking up from the paper directly at Richter. Her voice was filled with a new, quiet authority. She turned to Sterling. "Sir, with all due respect to your legal team, they have been given a profoundly inaccurate understanding of what this clause represents. The man who advised them," she glanced pointedly at David Chen, who flinched as if struck, labeled this clause as sentimental. "That is a catastrophic misinterpretation." "What are you talking about?" Sterling demanded, his eyes narrowing. "This isn't a legacy clause, sir," Sarah explained, her voice gaining passion. "In German, the concept it's built around is Heimat. It doesn't have a perfect English equivalent. It means more than home. It's about roots identity, a sense of belonging that is intertwined with community. This paragraph isn't about feelings. It's a structural guarantee. It's the German equivalent of a constitutional promise to his people and his town that this merger won't strip the company of its soul. It's a promise that Sterling Dynamics won't just buy the factory, but that it will inherit the responsibility that comes with it." She slid the paper across the table to Sterling. "He's not asking for a plaque, Mr. Sterling. He's asking you to be a custodian of a 100-year-old trust. He is testing you. He needs to know if you are a partner who will uphold that trust, or an acquirer who will strip his company for parts and discard the community it was built to support." The room was silent. Sarah had just performed open-heart surgery on the deal, laying bare the blockage that had been slowly killing it for weeks. She had recontextualized the entire conflict, moving it from a legal squabble to a profound question of character and intent. Robert Sterling stared at the paper, then at Sarah, then at the suddenly nervous-looking David Chen. The pieces were clicking into place in his mind. The weeks of frustration, the reports from David about the stubborn and emotional Germans, the inexplicable friction, it all suddenly made a terrible kind of sense. He had been fighting the wrong war on the wrong battlefield because his own scout had given him a faulty map. Amelia Hayes looked at David Chen with eyes of ice. His career at Sterling Dynamics was over. She knew it. He knew it. And Sterling was just beginning to realize it. Finally, Sterling looked at Klaus Richter. The anger and frustration were gone, replaced by a dawning, grudging respect. He had been tested, and he had been failing. "Ask him," Sterling said to Sarah, his voice low and serious, "if he would give me the honor of explaining how I intend to be that custodian." Sarah turned back to Klaus Richter, her role shifting once more. She was no longer just an interpreter of words, but a facilitator of understanding the chief architect of a bridge being built across a cultural canyon. Herr Richter, she relayed her German formal, yet imbued with the gravity of the moment. Mr. Sterling wishes to express his profound regret. He confesses that he has been viewing this document through the wrong lens. He asks for the honor of explaining to you not his legal position, but his personal commitment to becoming a custodian of the trust your family has built. The choice of the word Ehre, honor was crucial. It resonated with Richter's traditional values. For the first time all evening, the German CEO leaned back in his chair, a sign that he was prepared to listen. Truly listen. And so began the most important negotiation of Robert Sterling's life. It was a negotiation not of numbers or terms, but of principles. Guided by Sarah's questions, prompted by her nuanced understanding of what Richter needed to hear, Sterling began to speak. He didn't talk about maximizing profits. He talked about his own grandfather, a man who had started a small machine shop in his garage in Detroit. He spoke of the pride of creating something tangible, of providing jobs, of being a pillar in a community. He admitted that in the rush to grow his global corporation, he had sometimes lost sight of those founding principles. Sarah translated it all. She captured the hint of vulnerability in Sterling's voice, the genuine regret, and the newfound respect. She conveyed it to Richter not as a calculated business tactic, but as a sincere confession from one company founder's grandson to another. "Tell him," Sterling said, leaning forward, his hands flat on the table, "that I see now, paragraph 17 is not a liability. It is a feature, not a bug. It's a quality control mechanism for the company's soul, and I will not remove it. I will sign it, and I will give him my personal guarantee as a man that I will uphold it." When Sarah translated this, a stillness fell upon the German delegation. Richter looked at Sterling, studying his face intently, searching for any sign of insincerity. He found none. The American CEO, who hours before had been a caricature of impatience and arrogance, now looked like a statesman. Richter then asked a series of sharp, probing questions. What did Sterling know of the German apprenticeship model? How would he integrate it? How would he ensure the plant manager in his German facility had the autonomy to make decisions that benefited the local community, even if they didn't show immediate returns on a quarterly report? These were questions Sterling's team had never even considered. But with Sarah there to explain the context behind them, Sterling rose to the challenge. He didn't offer canned corporate answers. He offered creative, collaborative solutions. He suggested forming a joint heritage committee, co-chaired by Richter himself, to oversee the implementation of the legacy clause. He proposed funding a new STEM education program at the local German high school to create a pipeline for future apprentices. He wasn't just agreeing to the clause, he was embracing it, building upon it. The atmosphere in the room was transformed. The chill had dissipated, replaced by a palpable warmth of mutual respect and excitement. The two associates of Herr Richter, who had been so stoic before, were now smiling, murmuring to each other in appreciative tones. Finally, after nearly 2 more hours of constructive dialogue, Klaus Richter stood up. Robert Sterling and his team immediately rose as well. Richter walked around the table until he stood directly in front of Sarah. He looked down at her, his blue eyes no longer icy, but filled with a deep, sincere gratitude. "Miss Jenkins," he said in German, his voice resonating with emotion. "In my 70 years I have worked with ambassadors, ministers, and the most expensive consultants in the world. I can say without hesitation that you are the most effective communicator I have ever met. You did not just translate our words tonight. You translated our intentions, our souls." He then switched to his careful English for everyone to hear. "You have saved this great enterprise." He turned to Sterling and extended his hand. "Mr. Sterling, we have a deal. Send me the contract tomorrow. Do not change a single word of paragraph 17. Sterling grasped his hand firmly, a wide, genuine smile breaking across his face. "You have my word, Klaus." The handshake was firm, the relief in the room so thick it was almost a physical presence. The deal was done. As the two CEOs spoke, sharing a quiet laugh, Amelia Hayes approached Sarah, who was still seated looking slightly dazed by the whirlwind of events. "That was the most extraordinary thing I have ever witnessed in my career," Amelia said, her voice low and full of awe. Before Sarah could respond, Sterling turned his attention to his disgraced junior executive. His voice, now devoid of heat, was chillingly cold. "David," he said, not even looking at him, "Amelia will be waiting for you in her office at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Bring your resignation letter." David Chen stared at Sterling, his face a mess of panic and shame. He opened his mouth to protest, to make an excuse, but a single withering look from Sterling silenced him. He grabbed his briefcase and practically fled the room without another word. The path of destruction caused by his ignorance and ambition was finally cleared, and in its place stood Sarah, the quiet waitress, who had single-handedly salvaged a multi-billion-dollar legacy. Robert Sterling now turned to her, his expression a complex mixture of gratitude, embarrassment, and sheer astonishment. "Miss Jenkins," he began, "I owe you an apology, and a debt I'm not sure I can ever repay." The aftermath of the handshake was surreal. The Germans, now warm and talkative, were sharing a celebratory glass of vintage cognac with Sterling and Amelia Hayes. The tension of the evening had vanished so completely, it felt like a distant dream. In the center of it all, Sarah sat an island of quiet disbelief. She had come into this room to clear plates, and she was leaving it having reshaped the future of two global corporations. Sterling, after concluding his conversation with Richter, walked over to her. He pulled up a chair and sat down, not as a CEO addressing a waitress, but as a man acknowledging a peer. "I was wrong," he said, his voice stripped of all its earlier arrogance. "I was rude, I was dismissive, and I was about to fire the most valuable person in the room. I am truly sorry." "It's all right, Mr. Sterling," Sarah murmured, still overwhelmed. "You were under a lot of pressure." "That's an excuse, not a reason," he countered. "What you did tonight, it wasn't just translation. You have a gift, Miss Jenkins, a profound understanding of people. That's rarer than any balance sheet or patent." He paused, studying her. "I looked you up," he admitted. "Or rather, I had Amelia do it while I was talking to Klaus, University of Chicago, PhD candidate, Germanic Studies, full scholarship. You were at the top of your class." He shook his head in wonder. "What happened?" The question was direct, but his tone was gentle, genuinely curious. For the first time in 3 years, Sarah felt no shame in telling her story. She spoke of the accident of her parents, of her sister Molly, and of the dissertation on German industrial philosophy left to gather dust on her laptop. Sterling listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. "You gave up your future for your family," he stated simply. It wasn't a question. "That's honor. That's legacy. The very thing I was too blind to see in Richter's contract, you've been living it every single day." He stood up. "This isn't a job offer, Miss Jenkins, because what you're doing now, is not your job. This is a course correction. I am creating a new position at Sterling Dynamics, effective immediately, Vice President of International Strategy and Cultural Relations. It will report directly to me. I need someone to ensure that we never, ever walk into a room this blind again. I need a custodian for our company's soul. The salary will be enough to pay for your sister's college education 100 times over. And we will fund the completion of your PhD if you still want it. Sarah stared at him speechless. Vice President? The words didn't compute. It was a fairy tale, a fantasy. Waitresses didn't become VPs overnight, but the look on Sterling's face was deadly serious. I don't know what to say, she stammered. Say yes, Amelia Hayes said, joining them with a warm smile. Believe me, Sarah, we need you more than you need us. As the German delegation prepared to leave, Herr Richter approached her one last time. He handed her a simple, elegant business card. If this man ever fails to appreciate you, Richter said in German, a twinkle in his eye, you call me. There will always be a place for you at Richter Präzisionstechnik, the very highest place. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as she accepted the card. They were not tears of sadness or relief, but of a profound, overwhelming sense of restoration. The part of her she thought was dead and buried to the scholar, the intellectual, the strategist was alive and well. It had been there all along, waiting for a chance to speak. An hour later, Sarah walked out of the Gilded Compass for the last time. The cold Chicago wind hit her face, but she didn't feel it. She wasn't an invisible waitress anymore. She was Sarah Jenkins, the woman who understood the poetry of business, the one who could hear the silent language of the soul. Her past was not a tragedy that had derailed her. It was the education that had prepared her. And her future was no longer a question of surviving until the next paycheck, but of striding into a boardroom and ensuring that no one's voice, no matter the language, would ever be lost in translation again. Sarah's story is a powerful reminder that the most extraordinary skills can be found in the most unexpected places. It shows us that true value isn't always listed on a resume or reflected in a job title. Sometimes it's the quiet observer, the person who has faced hardship and cultivated a deep, unseen knowledge, who holds the key. Her journey wasn't just about knowing another language. It was about understanding people on a fundamental level, their history, their values, their pride. It proves that empathy and cultural intelligence are not soft skills. They are superpowers in our interconnected world. Her life was changed in one night, not by luck, but because she had the courage to use a voice she thought the world had forced her to silence. If this story inspired you or made you think, please give this video a thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow. And for more true stories about hidden heroes and incredible life-changing moments, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Share this video with someone who might need a reminder that their unique knowledge is valuable. Thank you for watching.